Hey, welcome everyone to the From the Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Shane Grove. Um, Again, Jason, the super producer, is out doing some super producing. Yeah, I know he hates to miss the shows, but it's just we're just not doing a very good job of scheduling. I wonder who the scheduler is. Oh, that's me. My bad. So before we bring our guest on, I want to remind everybody that if you have a story that you want to share with us, you can find us at From the Shadows podcast on Facebook. Go to After the Shadows, our forum page on Facebook. You can find me at Shane Grove Author on Instagram, or From the Shadows Podcast on Instagram, or just go to fromtheshadowspodcast.com, go to the contact page, send me an email. I will read it, I will respond to it, and if it's something really good, hopefully we can have you on the show. And then, not to forget, we do have a Patreon page that we do we do put up extra content every month. Just go check out, see what different levels there are. I know every episode gets put up there a day or so early, and it's commercial free for those of you who don't like the commercials. Um, so yeah, go check out our Patreon page. You just go to Patreon and search for From the Shadows podcast. So I'm excited to bring on our guest for today. And the funny thing is I didn't think Missouri was big enough for two personalities like the Ozark Howlers. But I think what we're going to find out is our guest today is probably equally as how should I put it, engaging as the as the Howler is. So I think the Howler might be in trouble. I don't know. So Dennis, welcome to the From the Shadows podcast from the is it what's Missouri, the Show Me State?
It certainly is.
How about that? How about that? So Dennis, I can't wait to, because as we discussed, the Ozark Howler, for our longtime listeners, know that we do a middle of the week show called the Midweek Howl,
Hmm.
because the Howler is a great storyteller and just a pretty funny dude, but he is not a believer in the paranormal. So once we started talking, and you said you were from Missouri, I'm like, I can't wait to share this episode with the Howler, because he's not listening. He doesn't tune in like every Friday when the paranormal episodes drop
Okay.
to try to get us to change his mind. He just doesn't even bother listening. So, so I can't wait to send this to him and say, hey, look, here's what's going on in Missouri. Uh, maybe you might want to do some checking, and see what's going on. So I'm counting on you, Dennis, that through this episode to change the Howler's mind. That's what we're aiming for.
Well, we'll give him some food for thought.
So Dennis, as we talked off the air, I mean, I don't even know where to start with some of your experiences and childhood on up through adulthood. So I want you to start at at where you believe the beginning is, and let's just go through this journey together.
I'd be happy to. I guess, I could tell a little bit about myself. I was born and raised right here in St. Louis, Missouri. And, even though it's a big city, I was fortunate enough to spend my summer months and many weekends in rural Missouri with extended family members, great aunts, great uncles, grandma, grandpa, uncles, and aunts. So, back, and I'm 64. So in the 60s, there were Missouri was quite rural. You didn't have to go too terribly far outside of St. Louis to hit the country life. And we had and we continue to have a great deal of forested area in Missouri. So I spent a lot of time in the woods and in these rural places, and I was very lucky because I had the best of both worlds. I grew up in the city, but yet I had access to all this country life. And believe me when I tell you, I utilized it every chance I got, every moment, every minute that I could get into the woods. That's what I would do. And as far as my family's concerned, I was born into a family of esoterics. So everybody in my family had some sort of gift or experience. My earliest recollections of family members telling me about their own out of body experiences was in the 60s. And I was just a kid, I don't know, 4, 5 years old. I tell them it happened to me too all the time. And they were very understanding about that. My great aunts, they kind of came from the early part of the 20th century when the spiritualism was winding down with the likes of Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. So they garnered a lot of information and practice from these concepts of Blavatsky's. And so our house was always filled with adult members doing seances. Now, I have one sibling. She and I, my sister, she and I were never allowed as children to participate in the seances. So even though we were still in the same house while it was going on, we weren't allowed to participate in the seances. But they were commonplace. I mean, I don't even know how many times a week, a month that these things were in progress. So it was just a constant thing.
I'm going to ask you quick about the family doing a seance. Okay.
Yeah.
Were they just trying to make contact with with a certain person or certain spirit that had passed on, or were they just, were these like specific seances to reach somebody and make contact, or were they, describe exactly what was going on and what the outcome, what was the desired outcome? And because I think people, like, it's not like were you guys sitting in the middle of the room with a Ouija board or with a crystal ball, or like what was going on?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll talk about that. There was every session had a target. So it wasn't something random. We didn't want to open up a portal, and have some energy come in that we weren't aware of or anything like that. It was usually they wanted to talk to a discarnate relative. Somebody had passed on. And they would all sit around the kitchen table. There was really nothing on the table, maybe a candle. And everybody would hold hands and the room would be dark. And of course, we were ushered out of the room and had to go play somewhere else. But my sister and I would always, peek around the corner and see what they were doing. We wanted to know as well, my sister and I, and she's very gifted. She has a lot of precognitive dreams and she has communicated with deceased relatives, as have I. But so in the seances, there was always a target. It was nothing random. They were pretty knowledgeable people. This was not something, it wasn't a parlor trick. It wasn't a get together on a Saturday night just to have some fun. I remember when I was a teenager by this time, and we were allowed to sit in on the seances, and my great aunt had passed. So this particular seance was to try to contact her spirit and to see if she would respond. And my uncle, a very receptive person as far as energies, he was leading the seance, and I'm telling you what, it was like it was unbelievable. Really, it was like clockwork. They opened up the seance with a particular saying, and expressed their desire to communicate with my great aunt. And my uncle said at that moment, if your presence is here with us, show us a sign. And as soon as he said sign, the telephone rang, and I reached up and grabbed the telephone. It was still an old rotary phone, on the wall, and I answered it. Nobody on the line. It was just a buzz. It was just nothing. And so we took that as a sign he was there. He became very upset emotionally and started crying. And I don't really know what had taken place because we were all there at the table and we were all holding hands. But something, he either was overwhelmed by her presence, or I'm speculating, but he removed himself from the table at this point and he ran out of the house and locked himself in the car. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and he didn't come back into the house until about 7 o'clock the next morning. So, but we never could get out of him, what he experienced, and what made him behave that way. But these are, so to answer your question, there was always a target. We always had a target in mind.
Well, because I've heard from psychic mediums and stuff that say, sometimes you shouldn't put too much trust in, if you're trying to contact somebody.
Oh yeah, you're talking about interlopers.
Yeah, that somebody might just lie to say, "Hey, look, these people are looking for Aunt Bertha." Okay, yeah. I'm gonna pretend to be Aunt Bertha, so I can, maybe I can get something out of this.
Well, here's my thought on that. People, unfortunately, in this world today, people subscribe to fear. Mm-hmm. So when you subscribe to fear, then you are going to attract fearful things. But what people need to realize is we are so very powerful, but they don't think they are. People don't think they are. They grow up learning a certain thing or a certain way of life or a certain belief system, and they discount themselves. So in our family, and I'm speaking from the earliest of ages, I'm going to use 4, but I have recollections of before the age of 4. But 4 is a place to start, because it always seems that children start talking about their past lives or experiencing OBEs or many different things, and they're wide open. As a 4-year-old, your mind is not fettered with nonsense from the mundane plane, and so you're receptive and you're like an open channel. So you do see these things and you do witness these things. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, we were talking about seances and things like that, but
about being, I mean, you were saying about being fearful.
Oh, that's it.
So,
people make a mistake. People make, and it's entertaining to hear all these spooky stories, and all these demons and all that. Listen, it may sound arrogant of me to say this, but I am Godzilla and the rest is Japan. I play no games on the other side. There's not a demon or a ghost or anything that's going to harm me. Guaranteed. And that's what people need to know in their own mind. You have an immortal soul, or whatever you want to call it. You have an animating life force in you. It is immortal. You cannot be harmed. You have to kill your fear and everything that you've learned on the mundane plane. Otherwise, you're just going to keep subscribing to it. And guess what? The thought, your mind, your thought is the most powerful thing that you have in existence. So if you think fear, you're going to experience fear. So we didn't worry about, I was introduced to, I've seen plenty of ghosts in my life. As a child, my sister and I were just dumbfounded at the activity that we experienced all through our whole life. But especially as children. But we learned very, very early on, no fear. You cannot fear these things, because if you do, then these energies certainly would love to feed on that. But that's the mistake people make. And they, for some reason, time after time, they adhere to this. I have never seen a spirit that was ghoulish, that was, as an example, I had a friend. She was a beautiful person. She died in a fire. And it took me a couple of years, and I'm an adult by this time. It took me a couple of years to find her in an out-of-body experience, but I searched for her purposely because I wanted to see if she was okay. And when I saw her, and this gets interesting because I have been out so many times on the other side. Now, listen, I know what I know is a speck in the universe, but I do know some things, and even though it's not much, I do know this, and it's just my reality, because there are plenty of people out there that have never experienced things like this. Here's my thought, and I'm going to get back to the woman who died in the fire. When you die, when you shed your physical body, you take with you your psychological makeup. So your consciousness is awake and your ego self is intact at that moment. So whatever belief system you adhere to, whatever psychological factors you have running around inside your brain, you take that with you. So if you're a fearful person, this is where the concept, now this is just my opinion, this is where the concept of heaven and hell came from. Certainly you can create your own hell. Look, if you were a bad person in your physical life, and you were negative, and you pushed out all this gross, slow moving, low undulating energy, where do you expect to gravitate to when you die? So you are the dispenser of your own punishment. And that's why you got to get it right in your head before you die, if you can. Otherwise, you're bound to repeat the process, and that gets into reincarnation and everything. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah,
So
let's not take that hard left just yet.
okay, so fear. So my sister and I were taught not to fear these things, right? And
Yeah.
as a child, certainly you are fearful because it's unexplained. It's unexplained phenomena that is taking place. But you quickly get a grip on it, especially if you're in a family like mine, and so then you understand it, and you no longer fear it. And so,
I think the biggest, and it goes hand in hand with the thing that I think, um, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Okay, you fear stuff that you don't understand,
yes,
because the more you understand, the less you fear. Okay, that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, and that's kind of the way it is in the world. If people say, "Oh, I could never do that," that just scare. Well, once no matter what it is, whether it's riding a motorcycle,
mhm.
writing uh, a screenplay, or just whatever, skydiving, anything that you choose to do, once you understand it and understand what can go good, go bad, or whatever, you can kind of face your fear and conquer it. I think is kind of. Um, I think that's kind of a good way to look at things, right?
Yeah, and you should face your fears. I mean, of course, we all have them. I had them also, and I still have some fears today. Um, but let me give you an example, just a quickie. As an example, we learn many things on the mundane plane. We learn about gravity. If you fall, it's going to hurt, man. So you don't want to fall, right? You're going to try to protect yourself, or you're going to try to avoid tripping or falling or something like that. In an out of body experience, you tend to take those psychological factors with you until you realize that they don't apply on the other side. So you have to unlearn things, and you have to kill fear. Otherwise, you stunt your growth and your movement forward consciously. So anyway, getting back to interlopers and spooks and things like that, we had a lot of poltergeist activity in our home. That's because some of the members, like you and I talked before the show about, did any of them participate in any dark magic or anything like that? And certainly there were a few members in the family that did. And as a result of that, I mean, you're talking about these gross energies, these negative energies. These things have a way of manifesting. I think poltergeist activity is brought on by a human living being. I don't necessarily think they're a demon. You know, uh, they if you're psychologically disturbed, or and to whatever extent, if you're in turmoil consciously, or you're wrestling with yourself as far as trauma, or whatever the case may be, that can manifest into objects. You can push that energy into things, and things start to happen. And I think that's
Well,
what.
I think that's what a lot of times when they go in and are investigating poltergeist activity, it a lot of times centers around adolescent, pre, kids who are getting ready to start puberty,
Oh yeah.
basically, because of all those emotions and energies and turmoil, like you said, within those kids. I mean, we all remember what it was like to go through puberty, and imagine if it went to another level where you started shooting glasses off the table and opening cupboards and making the house rock.
Oh yeah.
That's yeah. I'm right there with you on that. I think, like you said, I don't think we understand how powerful our brain really is,
Oh, people
and
don't.
our it just yeah, it's crazy. I think if you could probably accidentally do some stuff if you could tap into all the power that is up there, and the other subconscious planes that you could get into, you know.
Oh, you could get into them. I mean, who knows how many there are. I've been to many different levels or frequencies, whatever you want to call it. But I'm sure it's nothing in the whole scope of things. You know what I mean? Even though I've experienced it throughout my life, there is so much more, and it's like a big giant rabbit hole. You just got to keep going and going and going. Really, you know.
So now you and your so let's get to stuff. I think maybe because this is some fascinating stuff. I think some people almost can't comprehend,
Yeah.
like, what you're talking about. This is like, not like you said. You guys weren't the normal family down the street. So
No,
what?
we were more
So
like
what?
without the spooky effects. You know.
Without the cool mansion. Is that what you're
That's
saying?
right. That's right.
So like when you say you and your sister experienced ghosts or spirits,
Yeah.
like, so you guys had, obviously, being exposed to the family that you were and the belief system, did it freak you out at first, or
Oh
once
yeah.
you
You know.
learned and understood it?
Oh, sure. I mean, when you're young, you do have these fears. I mean, all right, here I had a reoccurring nightmare on the daily. And this is all centers around the age of, man, it's had like between 4 and 6 years old. Um, a full-sized ostrich with a man's head on it would walk down the hallway to my bedroom, the only room in the back of the house, mind you. And if that wasn't creepy enough, um, but every night this ostrich would walk into my room and bend over and stare at me with this man's head on its neck. And I got the covers over my head and I'm shaking like a leaf. Now that's a reasonable fear to have as a 4 to 6 year old. You don't usually see that thing walking down the street. So, but it was a reoccurring nightmare. Yeah, we did have fears. Now, my sister was pretty brave. I got to be honest with you. She's only a year older than I am, but she was remarkably brave during a lot of these things. And of course, she was always protective of her baby brother. That's me. So I think that she had a role that she took on this role as protector. But I soon grew out of the fear. The poltergeist activity remained for many, many years. You would see black shadows, floating down the hallway. It literally tore the doors, a door off its hinges and slinged it down the hallway, down the basement steps before trashing the entire basement. And it was only my mother and my sister and myself in the home. And we just stayed upstairs because we didn't want to go down there with all that commotion going on. But afterwards, of course, we went down there and everything was just, all the drawers in the kitchen were open, like the classic scene where everything comes flying out, and it was laying on the floor. And then you'd hear footsteps upstairs while you were downstairs, and they'd also come up the basement steps. The basement, when I say basement, it was finished, so it wasn't like it was a storage basement or anything like that. It was finished. It actually had a kitchen and a living room area and a dining area downstairs in the basement. And that sounds fancy, but it wasn't. We lived on the north side in a two-family brick flat that was built in the early 1900s. So, and he even had and then there was a door behind the kitchen where it went into the old basement proper, which was stonework. And there was an old room where they shoveled coal down through the sidewalk. So we always called that the dungeon. So we grew up in these big, old creepy places. Um, but yeah, the poltergeist activity, and then of course you had visitations from discarnate humans. They would always come. I mean, they would. I guess because as children, my sister and I, we hadn't clouded our minds yet. It was all a wonder. It was just all a wonder. So we didn't carry weight with us like adult people. We were free to experience ghosts. My sister saw a man come through the wall dressed in a 60s suit with a black fedora and a suitcase. And as he came through the wall, he looked around, shook his head, and walked right back through the wall. I saw a disembodied head floating in the window, just outside my bedroom window. And I say disembodied because the window that the head appeared in was at least 8 feet off the ground. So I didn't think that there was a body associated with that head, unless it was an extremely tall human being. So we witnessed a lot of those things, apparitions, people, discarnate family members. Um, this is, let me see, maybe 25 years ago. My mother and I were called down to Shreveport, Louisiana. We have family in Shreveport, and one of our relatives died, and they asked me to be a pallbearer. So we went down there and stayed. We were asked to stay in their home. We had rented the hotel. They said, no, you stay in our home. So I was sleeping in one of the guest bedrooms that night before the funeral. And my second cousin, the one who passed away, her name was Dottie. She was almost a twin of my mother. When they were younger, you couldn't tell them apart, but they were very, very close. And then, of course, as you get older, everybody goes on with their life and things. But they did keep in touch. So I'm sleeping in this guest bedroom one night, and the bed, and I didn't want to disturb a thing. I really tried to be, just as courteous and polite about not disrupting anything, because the room was all made up. You know how older people, they keep their rooms real nice,
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so I just unfolded one side of the cover and just kind of slipped in. So the pillows on my right were all tucked under the cover and everything. And I thought, well, I'll be fine because I sleep still on my back. And suddenly the bed just starts shaking wildly, and I'm hearing Dennis, Dennis, and it's Dottie, that my second cousin. She actually came back to tell me that she had a message for her husband, who was also in the home, and she wanted him to know that she was okay. And I said, Dottie, what are you doing? It was just really strange, and I hadn't had a manifestation, and an apparition, manifestation of a spirit that you could see in quite some time. And I'm an adult at this point, and it only as a child did I really get those visuals. Now I
So
still have a
was
lot of it.
so was Dottie one of the family members that were at your house taking part in seances and stuff?
Not really. We have a family down in Shreveport, and they're more conservative. They've always been more conservative and religious. But deep down in the underlying current, they knew. You know, I know Dottie did. That's why she came to me. Uh, but they never spoke of it. They grew up fairly religious, and so we were still the odd family. You know, and when I went down there, they even called me a damn Yankee. I said I live in St. Louis, right out loud, man. You know, uh, but so we were kind of like that those family members that nobody really got into depth in conversation about. You know what I'm saying? Oh yeah, those are the Menards. Those strange people up there, but family nonetheless. But Dottie knew, and her mother knew too. Uh, they just didn't say. They just didn't say because of their upbringing.
So when you okay, so when you went, I'm assuming you went then to her husband and said, "Hey, Dottie visited me last night. Said she was okay."
Yeah, I didn't feel it was the right time. I got to be honest with you. I sensed something was not. It wasn't the right time to tell him. He was just um, not in a good state. And being such a conservative fellow, I held off for a little bit, and then I told him. But he didn't really say much when I told him. Kind of brushed the comment aside, But I told him, I said, I have to tell you this because this is what she wanted me to do. But and then I went on to tell him, and I might have made a mistake about this because they were so conservative, that he had a window of opportunity to see her if he actually wanted to. And who knows? I didn't get an opportunity to talk with him much after that, and he never brought it up. But I wanted him to know that Dottie was, he could communicate with her if that's what he wanted to do. And they really loved one another. They spent their entire life together. I mean, I don't know, probably 45, 50 years. So when you're that close, you develop a what do you call it? A link, a bond, or
Yeah. Oh yeah.
board,
Yep.
as they call it in the modern times. There, you do have a connection. So maybe did he? I don't know. I really don't know if he ever went on to see her or not, because he just recently passed away a couple of months ago, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him about it. But these things, these occurrences. I mean, we moved from this particular place because it was just so freaky. Stuff flying around the house all the time. I mean, every day something was being knocked over or pulled out of a drawer, or I didn't hear many voices, but I did hear a lot of footsteps and shadow figures and disembodied.
Do you realize how silly that sounds, that the people talking to dead people are freaked out? I'm just putting that out there.
What are you saying? Like, dead people is unusual?
I'm just saying that people got to be listening, going, "No, wait a second, these guys are talking to dead people, and they're freaked out over some, noises." I mean, come on.
Oh, I get you. Yeah. Oh, there you go. That's the unseen. I mean, hey, know yourself. In fact, I've said that many times whenever I've had activity. A couple of years back, right in this very room, I walked in, and I walked to the end of the room, and at the far end of the room, something just came right off my shelf, and I turned around and I said, "Would you mind, you know, showing yourself so I can see who you are?" But no, of course they didn't. But and it's funny too, because you grow up like this, and you think that this stuff is going to stay with you, or you're always going to be able to see them, and you can't. It's weird. My my grandkids come over all the time, and one is 3 and one is 1. Now my mother, she just passed a year ago in June, and she's been here on many occasions. And my wife's mother, I believe, is also hanging around here specifically for these grandkids, because the 3-year-old and the 1-year-old, they'll look up at the ceiling and they go, "Oh, hi," all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, why can't I see them? How come I cannot see them? I have seen them before. Why can't I see them now?
And those kids are totally just doing that. I mean, it's not like you guys are having seances around the table right now,
oh no,
right?
No. Yeah,
That's the innocent of youth, and
it
they're,
is.
like you said, they're unclouded mind, and they're seeing. Okay,
There's no
wow.
doubt they're seeing somebody, and I don't have malevolent beings in this place. There, everything that happens here is light. You know what I mean? It's benevolent. But I do have, in the kitchen, I have a someone or something that likes to disturb my kitchen quite a bit, and I call him, just as a joke, Mr. Chuckles. And so every time there's a noise that goes on in the kitchen, I go, "Mr. Chuckles," and I keep waiting for a response. But kind of joke, that
Now
Mr.
listen, are you sure it's not your mother-in-law?
Oh, listen,
Let's just.
it could very well be, and it also could be my very own mother, my great niece. They have like, I'm a tech idiot, but my great niece has some kind of an app that you can download on your phone that registers heat signatures or energy of some sort, right? I don't know, clear or whatever. But anyway, 2 weeks after my mother passed, we were here discussing, what we should do next, things. And my great niece is walking around, and she captures, this is on video, mind you, a purple image looking out the kitchen window. And the silhouette is identical. It's my mother. She's looking out the kitchen window. And you could hear my great niece gasp because she went from room to room and she's just all over the place. And then she finally goes into the kitchen and she lets out a big gasp. And right there is the image, a silhouette of purple. It was purple in color. Silhouette of my mother looking out the kitchen window. And we got it on video. So, things like that happen all the time. It regularly seen it,
Well, okay, so man, this time is flying by. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, wow. So, so I got a million. I think there's a million roads we could go down, but I do want to but we want to get to the big guy.
Okay.
I want to get to the big guy and here because I think you got some pretty good experiences to share about, and I think I want to see how this all ties in with what you've already been talking about because I think maybe there's we'll see.
Well,
So,
oh
yeah, you know where I'm going. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Yeah. I know.
How much time do you have?
Oh, we got a good half hour. So
okay. Let me explain about the Bigfoot then. My experiences actually started in about the mid '60s, and
okay.
I told you before I was really fortunate to be able to have access to rural areas of Missouri. Regularly and routinely, I would stay with my great uncle, who I referred to as my grandpa Jim, but he was actually my great uncle, and my grandma Pat, my great aunt. They had felled in the 30s. They felled the trees and built a 2-room log cabin by hand. And I'm talking about with the horsehair chinking and everything. It was rural. There was we didn't have indoor plumbing in it. There was an outhouse. You had to go to a cistern to get the water and bring it back in the house. And you either bathed in a galvanized tub on the floor or you rinsed off as you poured a bucket of water in the sink.
How was the Wi-Fi? How was the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, that's funny.
You described that, and okay, that's not that long ago. Okay,
no, it is.
And to think that if you took kids these days and put them in that sort of environment, that sort of situation, they'd lose their minds. They wouldn't know what to do.
Oh yeah, they'd go stark raving mad, probably. Yeah, but we loved it, ate it up. I mean, to us, it was a wonderland to be able to experience these kind of things. There wasn't any, and of course, now when I was a kid, like you said, there was no technology. A good cardboard box is all you needed. I mean, you could make anything out of a cardboard box, man. That's what we used, So we used our imagination. My sister and I frequently played in the woods, which was 20 feet from the cabin, and it was expansive. I mean, you're running down into so this was in Kinsey, Missouri, which is kind of an unincorporated area of Bloomsdale. And then you got further down, further south or southeast, you've got St. Genevieve. And then it just gets more rural from there. So back then, it was all rural. It was a 2-lane blacktop that they lived on. And I think that the closest neighbor was probably, I'm guessing, like a mile away, And here we are in this little 2-room log cabin, which backed up to the woods. And the woods was my playground and my sister's playground. But the funny thing is, my great aunt always kept an eye on us. She said, when it starts to get dusk, you come back out of those woods because Granny Witch or Baba Yaga is going to get you. And so, she tried to instill enough caution or fear in us to get us out of the woods for some reason. So I would say in the middle of the night, and this has happened on many occasions, the Bigfoot must have routinely come through the woods very in close proximity to the cabin. because it would always be banging on the trees, right? I got my interest in Bigfoot, and I didn't know the term Bigfoot until probably in the late 70s, maybe. But back then, the hook for me was Yeti. You know, when Marlon Perkins and Edmund Hillary went to Nepal to prove or disprove the existence of Yeti, I was hooked, dude. I read everything about it. And once I read about that, one thing leads to another. Then you start looking at, history, the history of mankind, and one thing just leads to another. And I'm telling you, when I told you earlier, off air here, we didn't think about mundane things. We thought about the unexplained, the unknown, what's on the other side, what's life like after you die, all those things. That was, and so it was with the I don't even know when the term cryptozoological, whatever cryptozoology came into being, but those unknown creatures like the Yeti, to me, I was hooked, dude. I was convinced that the Yeti existed. I mean, the idea that Hillary and Perkins got funded to go there to check it out for themselves. Of course, Perkins, he was against it, but Hillary is like, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the Shipton footprints and everything up on the Himalayas, something was there. And of course, they tried to say, well, the sun, broadened the print, and it was just a bear stepping in a bear track. And then you got guys like Brian Sykes, who wrote the Seven Daughters of Eve. He was the geneticist they brought in for Ötzi, I guess that's how you pronounce it. Remember the frozen man they found in the Italian Alps? So he did the DNA sequencing on this frozen man, and I think he was like 5,000 years old. So he started a project that it called for samples from around the globe to be sent to him, so he could test them for, to see whether or not they had an unknown animal or whatever. And this was all based on the Yeti and Bigfoot in North America and Sasquatch. And, he came up with a common thing. He even went into Russia and told these people, these big Amnesty researchers over in Russia, that, their samples were something entirely different, which I found extremely intriguing, but I'll tell you why in a minute. But anyway, oh shoot! So we're talking Bigfoot. Anyway, so I was hooked. I was hooked with Hillary.
I can tell. Listen, I can tell you're enthusiastic about the subject. Trust me.
Oh my God! I know. I can never myself, and I don't know how anybody could. I hear all these people on podcasts. Well, it just stepped out in front. How could you even just talk like that, man? I mean, like, man, you will believe this thing jumped out. So anyway, so that's my interest. So they routinely knocked on trees behind our cabin. And we couldn't figure out what the hell it was to save our lives. Pileated woodpecker at night banging on a tree. I mean, they're big woodpeckers, right? But no, probably not. Some kind of a rogue logging operation? I don't think so. Maybe they were felling trees with an axe or something in the middle of the night.
Rogue. Now that is the first time I've ever heard that phrase, a rogue logging operation. Like, well, yeah. I never like that. Now that might be the strangest thing I've heard. This whole, like, what is a rogue? Like, why would you have a rogue? Like, I could make moonshiners out there. Somebody, deer hunting illegally at night. A rogue logging. That's great. I love it.
Qualify that. Here is because you can have property, large tracts of land here in Missouri, and people will come onto your property and fell your trees without your knowledge. And like walnut, if they find a stand of walnut, they'll take it, or
to use it to build furniture and stuff.
Well, it's very profitable. It's like an industry. They'll come on your land, they'll take your trees.
I got to admit that right there, I thought I was talking to the howler, because that sounded like something he'd say, a rogue logging operation. I got you somehow subconsciously merged with the howler on. Okay. So
oh my gosh, it's a Vulcan mind meld.
Yes, let's get back. Okay. All right, we're back on track here.
Yeah. So, I'm running these scenarios through my mind, even as a kid and up into my teens, trying to figure out just what the hell is going on in the woods. And then it dawned on me, my great aunt wanted us out of there for a reason. because they roamed around at night in the back of the cabin, just in the woods, not too far off from the cabin. And she did not want us to be abducted. So she made sure that we were out of the woods at dusk. And if we weren't, she even dressed up one time. She put a big black shawl over her face and it hung down over her body. And she snuck around into the woods and came at us from the interior of the woods to chase us out. And where do you
To kind of
think got that
scare
idea?
you back home, huh?
Yeah, to
Like
carry it back home. And so anyway, let's fast forward. Missouri had a famous, and I'm going to say Bigfoot because that's what it was, sighting in 1972, and it was called the Momo
oh
sighting.
yeah, the Momo. Yep.
All right, so and that all took place in Louisiana, Missouri, a beautiful ride from St. Louis up the 79 corridor that just parallels the Mississippi River all the way up. It's gorgeous. But anyway, so at that time, I was spending the summer months. This was July of 1972. I am staying with my aunt and uncle in what was then rural Wentzville up north. And it was just a little west of the 79 corridor and just east of or south of Louisiana, Missouri. So you know about the Momo incident and you've probably heard the stories, but I can tell you this to this day, that area still has sightings of Bigfoot. And here's the reason why. You've got the Mississippi River, so you've got a water source, and a guide, I guess, if you wanted to use it, like they're using maps or whatever. But you've got plenty of wooded area in that region, and you've got plenty of deer and other animals to eat. So you've got food, water, shelter. What else do you need? Right? So to me, it's a major thoroughfare for the Bigfoot to either come from the north down south or vice versa. But in 72, there was a big flap in Louisiana, Missouri. There were many sightings. But what they didn't realize is before all that went down, I'm on my uncle's farm in Wentzville, Missouri. We're spending the summer months. It was my sister, cousin, aunt and uncle, and myself. And we're sitting around the kitchen table. It's like 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, the chickens go crazy. He's got a coop not too far from the house. So he goes out the back door of the kitchen with a flashlight. And he's out there for, I don't know, a minute. And he comes back in. And now my uncle was very dark. He was actually detained in Mexico. They didn't want to let him back into the United States, even though he was born here. But they thought he was trying to, as an illegal coming into the States. But so he was a very dark complected person. However, when he came into the kitchen, he was pasty white. I mean, white, and sweating bullets, and his eyes were as big as dollars. And he goes, "You're not going to believe this, but there's some big white," and he said, "white, hairy creature, got to be 8 foot tall, 8 foot tall, trying to get to the chickens." I flashed I put the flashlight on it, and it had its back towards my uncle. And he said it turned around, but it had to turn like its whole upper torso to kind of look at him. And when he shined a flashlight in its eyes, it turned and ran down the gravel driveway, was up on a hill. And he said it went down on all fours, briefly on all fours, shot across the road, cleared a 4-foot barbed wire fence with the grace and agility of an athlete, and cut a diagonal path into the woods. Now he is freaking out. So we grab a couple 30-30s, he and I, and we're out the door. And we actually gave chase. So we crossed the road. We had to go under the barbed wire and into the cornfield, but you could clearly see something just mowed down the corn, headed off into the woods. So we got to the wood line. I went left, he went right. And I guess I went about 100 yards in and put my back against a tree. And I'm telling you something I never heard. Well, I actually did recently, but I'll tell you about that. The forest was so silent. There was no bugs, no crickets, no frogs, no nothing. Nothing was stirring. I mean, there wasn't even a wind. And I thought that was kind of strange. So I'm sitting there. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. And I'm out there for about 45 minutes. And I finally hear my uncle calling, and he's off to the right somewhere. And I guess he made his way back up to the cornfield. And so I come out of the woods and I said, "What'd you see? What happened? What'd you do?" Pretty much the same thing I did. Went in. He said he saw some tracks initially, but he became afraid and didn't follow him very far. He said he went in about 100 yards, put his back against a tree. Same as me. So we came back to the house and we told everybody, and they all started laughing. Right? They're laughing at him because it is in fact a truth that my uncle was a prankster, and my aunt thought he was just pranking, pulling a prank. There's no way he was pulling a prank, man. You should have seen his face. And we both had loaded 30-30s, and he could hardly speak. So I believed every word he said. He said it was white, massive, 7-8 foot tall. He said the hair on it was kind of wavy, white hair, maybe 3 inches long, something like that. So guess what? This happened a week or two before the sightings up in Louisiana, Missouri. So when the national news broke, I'm like, that's it. This is because, but the ones in Louisiana where they were like black, red, and brown color, the ones that were spotted. So this one was very unusual in that it was white. And the idea that it went down on, he described it going down on all fours and then having this just like movement of a professional athlete, so graceful. That stuck with me. And then I read Lauren Coleman's book decades later about Bigfoot, the true story of apes in America. And in it is an article about, or a couple of paragraphs about the Momo sightings. And also down in Cairo, Illinois, which is just a, stone's throw as a crow flies from where I was at, somebody saw in July of 1972 a white Bigfoot. Although nobody called it a Bigfoot. Nobody used the term Bigfoot. But they saw a white creature down in Cairo, Illinois. And if you're a local down there, they call it Cairo. But so, I mean, I was absolutely enthralled and hooked. I was already hooked about these creatures anyway. And I knew just intuitively that these creatures existed. They have to exist.
Well, did you think, like when you saw white, did you think, oh my gosh, we've got a Yeti? Like, because that's...
Because, there was no separation for me back then between a Yeti and a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot or a Skookum or whatever you want to call it, Chiatanka, whatever names they gave them. To me, it was all the same type of being. And you got these people out there that subscribe to, there's one camp that subscribes to the Gigantopithecus theory. I don't. I'm going to say right now that these beings are people, and modern day humans, sapiens better broaden their idea of what it is to be human. Because when Sykes did the DNA on all these samples that came in from North America and around the world, he says, it's tainted with human DNA. I don't know, Brian, you might want to think about that a little bit. How about this? How about that we share some of their DNA? How about that? I think that they are, number one, they're people. Number two, they may very well have been the first people. We didn't come out of the box looking like we do now. And this whole evolutionary thing, that's for people who want to consider that, I guess. But so the Bigfoot. So the story broke about 2 weeks later about this incident up in Louisiana, Missouri, and said, man, we had a white one on our farm, 2 weeks prior to that. And the farmer across the road, he said that his cattle went missing. Something was stealing his livestock. And you heard little buzzes around the community, and it was rural. So, I mean, when I say community, I'm talking about rural place, like Farmer Joe down the lane here says that his pig went missing, or somebody said their cow went missing. And so I connect with the incident in my uncle's farm with what was happening just a stone's throw away up in Louisiana, Missouri. To this very day, there's a conservation area up off of 79 called Ted Shanks Conservation Area. And there are still sightings to this very day in Ted Shanks. And it's a weird place, man. I went out there in a day, and it's all marshlands. But if you drive further and further back into it, you eventually come up on the Mississippi River. But it is just a weird, weird feeling to be there. You feel like you're being watched, and it's like yeah, this is kind of creepy out here. It's kind of creepy, and not because it was all closed in, because for the longest time it's an expanse of a wide openness. It's open, it's marshland, and it's amazing, but it's eerie. It's really eerie. So to this day, there's Bigfoot sightings in Ted Shanks on the 79 corridor. So in a roundabout way, my uncle and I were involved in the whole Momo thing, but nobody talked about the other experiences that were taking place at the same time in and around Louisiana, Missouri. Only Louisiana, Missouri got the attention, and I don't know why, because it was much more than that. It was much more. But I all right. Let's get to the one. Let's get to the biggie. When you get to the biggie, I'll get to the biggie.
Hey, I'm here for the biggie and the smallie.
All right, I'm
Whatever.
fast forward from 72 to 2016. So I'm a big hiker, backpacker. Like I said, I enjoy our state. It has much to offer. We have one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, the St. Francis Mountains, and it's been a pleasure to traverse all over those mountains in my time. So I wanted to knock off sections of the Ozark Trail, and I asked my brother-in-law if he'd like to come with me, and he agreed. So we started training for, because it was a pretty rugged, and we only spent, plan on spending a couple of days out there, but still it was pretty rugged territory. And we thought, well, let's train for it a little bit. So we used some local trails that are in the area just outside of St. Louis to train on. And let me tell you, man, psychologically, physically, these trails are not that bad, but one of them was 14 and a half miles. But psychologically, it broke me, dude. And I was never broken on a trail ever. But I was just, by the end of this trip, which took a lot longer than I thought it would, psychologically, I just cracked, frustrated at the idea that I was still in the woods well after dark. And not that that was a problem, but, I anticipated getting out a lot earlier. But anyway, long story longer. So he agrees to go on this trip with me. This is a southeast Missouri, and it's, I don't know, a 15-mile section of the Ozark Trail. But we wanted to take a couple of days to explore it and just relax. A lot of people these days, they seem to be in a hurry and they just blast through these places, and why, I don't understand. So we packed in early in the morning. And there were two other people. His daughter and her girlfriend were with us, and I had never really, prior to going on this trip, hiked with anyone. I went solo, which is probably not the best idea that I've ever done, because I got myself into some situations like, man, you could just disappear, dude. Nobody's going to know where you're at, But that's another story altogether. So we get out. We put in the system before, and when I say put in the system, I don't mean water, but we in the woods, before the sun came up, and we hiked in for 7 hours. And I had a map, and I had targeted an area on the map that I wanted to stop and camp. But just on the other side of this mountain, as we were approaching it, I came across a creek that I did not see on the map. And it was full of water, and it was just enough space to set up camp. I said, this is perfect, man. We've been hiking for 7 hours. Let's call it a day. It was still midday. And so we unpacked our gear, refreshed our water, made some dinner, shot the bull. And right around dusk, and I'm the oldest one of the group, I said, you know what? I'm going to bed. Yeah, y'all have a good time, whatever. So I had stuffed my 9mm in my backpack, and my flashlight and my phone. I had no electronics, no illumination. I gave the girls my machete, because we were bushwhacking in some parts, and they had everything. So I overnighted in a hammock like an idiot. I'm telling you, dude. I mean, it was wonderful. I had to be out in 30 seconds. I have no problem sleeping anywhere, anytime. I can sleep on a rock, and I'll be asleep in 30 seconds. So I'm out. The next thing I know, I'm awakened to pitch blackness, and there's no moon, And this is in October of 2016. It was a moonless night, and I clearly hear bipedal footsteps coming down the eastern mountain. Now, I'm not concerned about it. And you know what the funny thing about this is? I didn't think of Bigfoot one time. I think I mentioned it once during the day. Usually, it's all that's on my mind. But since it was a different dynamic, I was with other people. We were just, enjoying the scenery and all this, blah, blah, blah. So it didn't really cross my mind. So when I heard these bipedal footsteps coming down the eastern mountain, I'm thinking to myself, somebody is lost out here because I know what is east of us, and that's a 10-hour hike to anything that resembles civilization, 10 hours on foot. So I thought, it's funny. This hiker doesn't have a flashlight. There's no illumination, and it is pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face. So I'm really not concerned. I got 3 other people in the camp, and we do have weapons, but I don't have any on me. And it's kind of an unwritten rule that if you approach somebody's camp, you better announce yourself. You could get shot easily. So I'm thinking, all right, this person's lost. Gonna walk into camp, announce that he's lost. I only had it in my mind that men are crazy enough to do something that stupid. But so
You don't know any women? I'm sorry. I apologize.
I actually know a couple of crazy that would do it, but at this point, I'm thinking it's a dude, and I'm thinking and the footsteps are getting closer, and clearly bipedal. I'll say this right now: you can discount any quadruped on the planet. We got black bears, we got puma, we got coyotes. We don't have any wolves, but we got some pretty good predators that are hanging around. And the place was it was evident that wild boar were everywhere along this trail. So it wasn't a hoofed quadruped. It wasn't a 4-legged of any kind. Clear sound, 2 steps at a time, foot after foot, bipedal. And I wasn't concerned. I'm thinking, well, this guy's going to announce himself when he steps into our camp, because that's the way he was coming. He was coming into camp, it seemed like. And so I'm just listening. Just, at this point, there's no concern. And I'm very comfortable in the woods. Never been afraid. So the footsteps come very close, and it steps up over a berm and into the proximity of our camp, which is about 30 feet from where my hammock is hanging. So, and then it stops. And I think to myself, okay, where's that announcement? Hey, I'm lost. I need a place to stay. Is it okay if I stay here tonight? Whatever. Let me tell you something. That is not what happened. This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream you've ever heard in your life. And it cut through me like a knife. And I was frozen, instantly frozen in fear. And I'm sitting here talking about, you got to kill your fears. Let me tell you something. I felt like a child, and I knew exactly what it was because it wasn't my first time in the proximity of them. It was the first time, however, one was bold enough to step into our camp. And it went absolutely out of its mind, screaming at the top of its lungs. It picks up a rock and it's banging it on this tree, just hammering this tree. And then it starts bluff charging us, and I can't see a damn thing, right? I can't see anything, but I know exactly what it is. And I figured I was going to die, not because of the Bigfoot, but because my heart was going to explode. It was so close. And it kept coming at us, and I couldn't say anything. I was paralyzed. I was convulsing, of course, all that adrenaline running through your body. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't think clearly. All I could do was sit there and shake in my hammock like a child. And this thing is just absolutely going nuts. It's screaming at the top, and there's no gravel in the voice. It's pure. It's like a pure frequency, which really freaked me out because you could feel it penetrating your body, And I'm thinking any minute my heart is just going to blow through my rib cage, and it's going to be all she wrote. So it's bluff charging us. It's coming at us and stepping back, and it's banging on this tree and screaming at the top of its lungs. Well, I guarantee you, I didn't have the presence enough to say peep, nor could I. If my brain was telling me to speak or run, not happening. I couldn't go anywhere. And where am I going to run to? So I had to just sit there in this hammock. I'm laying in the hammock. And while this thing is going absolutely nuts. Now, I don't hear anything from my brother-in-law's tent, and I hear nothing from the girls' tent. And I have no idea what time of night it is. All I know is I can't see anything. And I know what is in our camp. And you could feel it every time it stomped on the ground. You could feel the vibrations just run through you, not only from its footsteps, but from its vocals as well. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. My heart is not going to be able to take this. And I thought in my mind, if I just remain calm, if I can just get a hold of myself, this thing is not going to hurt us. And that's what I was thinking. But then again, you get these wild thoughts, man, you're a goner, dude. So it wasn't happy, and it was not going away. This thing didn't go away. It kept stomping around, stomping. I have no idea how many minutes passed, how long it was there. It seemed like an eternity. And then it came straight for us. Now, the story gets even weirder. It's hard enough to try to convince people that Bigfoot are genuine, but they are. But the story just gets weirder and weirder. It came straight for us. And I have a theory about that, and I'll tell you in a minute. It stuck its paw out, or its hand, I guess, and raked it across my brother-in-law's tent. You can hear the nylon zipping all the way across the tent. He was maybe 15 feet from where I was at. And then this thing, it never stopped screaming. And it just stomping around, and it's coming. It zipped across his tent, and it came straight over to me. And I'm telling you, it was right on my left side at my head where the hammock was hanging on the tree. And it is absolutely going nuts. And I'm thinking, I can't take this. This is not happening. I can't take this. I'm going to die. And I know I wasn't going to die by the Bigfoot. I knew I was going to die by a heart attack. And I was just trying to get my breathing and myself under control. And it comes around the tree at the head and stands on my right side. And I'm telling you, this is the weirdest story you're ever going to hear. It stuck its hand out, its left hand, and pops it on my shoulder underneath the hammock and just zips it down my back. And it stomps over in between the girls' tent. And we had built a fire ring from rocks from the creek that day. But the fire, I have no idea what time it was. There was no fire in the pit. This thing starts rooting around in the pit, and it stokes the fire to a full flame. And you could see it standing there throwing its arms up in the air. It's got its head cocked back, screaming at the top of its lungs. And I'm just like, this is all I could do. The only thing I didn't do was suck my thumb like a child. But I'm telling you, I couldn't do anything. And it was stomping around the fire like a banshee, just absolutely displeased at our presence, And it circles the fire a couple of times, stomps back over to where the tree is, picks up the rock, and it's hammering it in. And this is screaming all the time at the top of its lungs. And then it stomps down into the creek and up on the western mountain. And I'm like, that's all I could do, And I'm thinking, just be calm, man. You got to get your heart together, because this is a real deal, And I'm just freaking. I mean, I'm beside myself. I have no control. Mind and body disconnect, and I'll just lay there and shake I don't even know how to explain it, like a leaf on a tree. And it is still screaming all the while climbing up on the western peak. Now, if that ain't weird enough, it gets weirder. Two big adults, and I have a theory about who was in the camp. Two big adults on the backside of the eastern mountain start wailing those long, low-sounding wails. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they would not stop. They were wailing like for an hour. And the one up on the western peak was continuing. It was kind of like a yappy, whoopy thing, But you could tell that these had to be adults, big ones on the backside of the eastern mountain, because they were just these long wail, deep booming voice wails. Way up north, some old hound dog chimed in, and on the backside of the western peak, pack of coyotes started chiming in with these two Bigfoot, and they would not stop. I'm telling you, it had to be an hour before they stopped. The one up on the western peak, I don't know where he went. And I'll tell you why I say, because I didn't see breasts on it when the fire came up. It was very, and listen, this thing was ripped to shreds. I mean, this was not some steroid muscle freak. This was a very tall, almost sinewy, but had more muscle mass than that. But you could see the striations of the muscles on it. Its hair, it wasn't like a bear fur. So you could see its skin, which was black, by the way. Its face was black. Underneath the hair, which was probably, I don't know, 2.5, 3 inches long, maybe. So that's really all I could tell. It looked like it had black eyes to me. I didn't see any glowing red eyes or anything like that. But what I did see was that its movement was just like I said about my uncle's. It was so graceful. It was fluid, and the muscles on it were just ripped. There was no fat content at all. It was ripped to shreds. And what do they eat game, and they don't have the diet that we eat, all the sugars and processed crap that we eat. So it's lean as can be, but it still has some mass, but it's just muscular, and it had very long arms, like the classic descriptions of it. Had long arms, and no neck, of course. The head set down on the shoulders. But let me tell you, I was never so glad for that thing to leave. Oh, get back to the story. So the two on the west, on the eastern side of the backside of the eastern mountain, kept just wailing, and I guess they were calling Junior home, and I'm figuring this was a young, maybe 20-something male that came into camp, gonna ignore the advice of its parents, and not mess with humans. So if that wasn't enough, I hear something coming down right behind me on the eastern mountain. This is coming right down behind me, and it stops within 20 feet of me. And I had just gotten my heart under control when all that fear and adrenaline just started coming back and shooting through me again. And I'm like, oh my God, there's something behind me. And I didn't see what it was, but I suspect it was another Bigfoot, probably a juvenile. And it stopped like within 20 feet of me. Now I'm freaking out because there's 4 of them. There's 2 on the backside of the eastern mountain, 1 on the western peak, and something right behind me. And still nothing from the tent, except for one moment when the girls' tent, when the fire stoked up and you could see the Bigfoot screaming around the thing. I heard the girls' tent zip down just slightly and then zip right back up, and that was it. Nothing other than that. No activity, no sound, no nothing. And so.
So wait, so even after it storms out of camp, everybody's still like you still can't get a hold of yourself enough to say, hey, because you're hearing everything else.
Oh my God, no! There was no speaking for me. My vocal cords were shut down. I mean, my brain was not in the right state of mind. There was nothing that I could do or anything. I couldn't speak. I couldn't walk. But at this point, I got to take a leak, right? So I know I'm not going back to sleep.
No, wait a second. I'm impressed that you hadn't already all over yourself.
I thought I would.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hey, let me just say this. When that Bigfoot put its hand on my shoulder, my ass sucked up 3 yards of nylon fabric. The hammock itself, man. I'm telling you, dude, that was. Now, it sounds incredible, and I know nobody's going to believe it, but that's okay with me, because you know what? They weren't there. And it happened. And it is an incredible story, and I know it is. So, long story longer, finally, the 2 on the eastern mountain, they shut up. For some reason, I forgot all about what was behind me. I'm still concerned about the one that was in camp, really, thinking it's going to come back or something. So I don't know how much time passed, but I know I got to take a leak. And all I was wearing was wool socks. I had taken my boots off and hung them over a line. And I hang my hammock kind of tight. So, when I hang my feet over, I'm still 2.5, 3 feet off the ground, I guess, maybe. And so I braced myself to come up out of the hammock, and I put my feet down, and they land on something fuzzy and warm right under my hammock. And now I'm just absolutely certain a heart attack is imminent. And I just pulled my feet back up in the hammock, and I just curled up in a little fetal position and laid on my side with my hands over my face, thinking, what the hell? What next? There's something under my hammock, right? And I know this is crazy, and it is crazy. But this is just, and you were talking about this earlier about, how is it that a person can experience this and that and that? You know what? I think there are some people that experience shit like that, and some people that don't. And it's all, it's got to be with your psychological makeup and your belief system, or how open you are, or how receptive you might be. I don't know. It's all conjecture, really. But it happened. So I just laid there shaking like an infant, and I stayed there forever, and I didn't dare move. And then I saw, I don't know how much time passed because I did not sleep, and I saw first light hit the ground, and I just bolted. I didn't care if there was anything under the hammock or not at this point, and I don't know how much time had passed because I'm delirious in my mind anyway. I jump out of the hammock, run over to the fire, get the fire going, stoke it up, and all of a sudden the girls come out of their tent. Uncle Dan, do you think that was a? I said, hell yes, it was a Bigfoot. What are you talking about? So they, here's the weird part, and it's all weird. Here's the weird part. They heard it coming down the eastern mountain. They heard the footsteps. They heard it come into the camp. They heard it banging on the tree. They did not, however, hear it screaming at the top of its lungs, which was virtually in their face. Now, somehow their brains block that shit out, and I have no idea what the process of that is. But there is no way they did not hear it. There's no way. But yet they'll tell you, we didn't hear it. I'm like, you're out of your mind. So my niece's girlfriend says, well, I heard it coming down the mountain, and I heard the two on the backside of the eastern mountain. But I got to tell you something. An hour before all this went down, she said, they were already in camp checking us out. And she said, they walking around the tents, walking around my hammock, walking around my brother-in-law's tent, all over the camp. And I didn't hear or see a thing prior to that one coming down the eastern mountain. So they were already there, and they already knew we were there. So my brother-in-law had yet not emerged from his tent, and he always told me, if I ever have an encounter with a Bigfoot, I'm never going to talk about it. I'm going, why? Why wouldn't you talk about it? Are you kidding me? It's one of the most phenomenal things to experience in your entire life, and you're not going to talk about it? So the girls and I were looking for physical evidence, right? Not that I needed any, but we were looking for like hair and shit like that, did you see on TV and stuff. I did see a scuff mark on some moss on the berm where it came in. And my niece found the rock and the giant hole that was smashed into the tree, and she put the rock in the tree like a puzzle piece. And so we knew that that's what he used to bang on the tree with. Now my brother-in-law, he finally comes out of his tent, and I said, you better start talking, man. And he goes, the only thing I'm saying is that something raked its hand across my tent last night, and that's all I'm saying. I said, that's all you're gonna say? That's all I get. And to this day,
so did he hear the yell, or he won't talk
he would never talk about it, never. And he hasn't to this day. But listen, so here's my theory about what happened that night. Now, the idea that they were in camp before any of us were aware of it, and we were oblivious to all things except for my niece's girlfriend said she heard him. That's pretty strange, but I figure the one that came down the eastern mountain and stomped into camp was probably a young Bigfoot, maybe in its 20s, all right, out on a Saturday night, doing what it does on a Saturday night, getting a drink from the only water source for the next 10 miles west, and it was heading west. And there is no water for the next 10 miles after where we were at. That's why we stopped there. It was the first water we ran across in 7 hours. And so it probably has a routine, maybe. I figured they live in the area, and it was probably just tripping on its own, thing, doing its own thing, stumbles upon us. Of course, that theory really doesn't hold if you figure they were in camp before, but sees us, is highly displeased that we're in its backyard. And I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere. If you went west, east, and north, you're minimum 7 hours to some sort of civilization. If you went east, you're 10 miles. If you went south, you'd probably get into Arkansas before you come across any civilization. That's how deep we were in. And
So even though it's a trail, it's not like people are there all the time.
oh hell no, people. I don't think people got enough balls, to be honest with you, to stay where we stayed. I mean, not many people. There are people, sure, there are a lot of people that do that, but no, it's not like it's a theme park, dude. There's no. When I say we were in camp, no, we had to make camp, in the woods as best as we could. And yeah, this place is not frequented on the daily. So here's this young Bigfoot going to ignore the advice of its parents, going to mess with us because it sees us there, is highly displeased that we're there in the first place, probably agitated, What, man, I just wanted to drink of water from my own damn creek, and here I find you, schmucks camping out here. So I'm going to mess with you. So I figure it's going to mess with us. It bangs on the tree, screaming at the top of his lungs. And since it got no response, not that I could do anything at all, it came straight for us and counted coup on us like the Native Americans used to do to French trappers and European settlers. Wouldn't kill you, but it was an act of bravery to say that you went up and you touched one of these white devils. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I got
That's exactly what I think happened. I think it was an act of bravery on this young Bigfoot's part. And then he went up on the Western Peak, hamming it up with his friends. Man, you should have seen what I did with these clowns down in the valley, dude. And that's what I think. I think it was an act of bravery, and it literally physically counted coup on us. And that's my story of my in-your-face Bigfoot. And then I had one in 2018, which, here's the story on that. I soloed a particular area down in southeast Missouri for about 4 years on the regular. I loved it down there. It's a magical place. Geologically, it's got hoodoos, caves, it's box canyons. It's got everything that a nature lover wants, right? It's woods and yeah, just beautiful place. So I used to hike it regularly, and every single time, the first time I went down there, I came to the realization. I first heard, I'm in the middle of the system, and I heard some very soft wooing sound, and it was you almost couldn't hear it. And I just had to smile because my first thought was, that's a young female Bigfoot. And I only say that because this is not the first time I've been in their proximity. So I've heard their sounds. I've heard, females opposed to males. And this was in my mind, because I didn't see it, a very young female Bigfoot. So I just kind of smiled, and I got this idea that this Bigfoot was very curious about we modern humans, and just had that kind of energy. That's what I felt. I felt this energy of this little being. And I eventually, not that particular day, but on another trip out there, and every single time I was out there, she would make herself known to me. I'd be on the bottoms by the creek, and she'd be walking the ridges, pacing me, and vocalizing to me in this very soft, wooing kind of a sound. And it was kind of comforting, really. But I eventually came across her footprints, which at the time were within the human range, but they were small, compared to what you see, these gigantic tracks of these big male Bigfoot. And I started photographing them, and I found a handprint down by a little small waterfall in the sand. So I put all this together, and I'm thinking in my mind, well, it's a very young, curious female Bigfoot, and has the most pleasing personality about her. That's what I got in my mind. I went out there one time, and there was a massive teepee structure, and it had to be 20 feet tall. It was massive, and every single branch was broken off. And I didn't dawn on me right away that she, or maybe others, put that together. My initial thought was that there must have been a Boy Scout troop out here or something, and they built this massive wooden teepee. But then I realized, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they could do that. It was really very intricate, and the entrance to it was very tall. And the whole structure had to be 20 feet tall. I don't know what the diameter was, maybe equally 20 feet or more, but it was big. So, long story longer, I meet my wife, and I'm telling her I hike this area in southeast Missouri, and there's a young female Bigfoot out there who follows me all the time, and she lets me know she's there with her vocalizations. And I never heard her knocking on a tree, but I always heard her voice. And she's laughing at me. She goes, "You're so full of shit. It's a Christmas turkey." And I'm like, "Well, all right, let's go hiking out there." So I take my youngest daughter, who was 17 at the time, and my wife out there. And it was a beautiful day. It had just rained, and so it was a cloud-covered day, but the colors were popping. It was in October, and it was just a gorgeous day. The creeks were running. We're shooting photographs. My wife's taking a lot of pictures. So we get up halfway through the trail, and the girls, they're climbing on these hoodoos overlooking the Forest Valley. And I'm kind of down by the wood line, and I'm going to set up a hammock for a while, take 5, right? And all of a sudden I see the girls, and both of them swivel their head at the same time towards the tree line. And I kind of chuckled. I said, "What'd you hear?" They said, "Something was knocking on a tree." And I said, "Really?" Because I didn't hear that. I said, "Well, I believe you because I heard the vocalizations of this young female." And they started laughing at me. They're like, "You're so full of shit." I said, "You just heard them. You just heard her knocking on a tree, right?" "Oh, that could have been anybody." I said, "There's nobody out here. You know, there's nobody on this trail but us." So they laugh and they forget about it. And so we continue on, and we finish the whole hike. We spent all day out there. My wife has taken tons of photos. She's down in the creek shooting up the elevation. The creek is has a higher elevation that comes down into the bottoms where we were at. And so end of story. A couple of weeks later, I'm at work, and she texts me a photograph. She goes, "Look at this photograph." She goes, "I'm nauseous. I'm going to puke." I said, "Why? What's up?" She goes, "Enlarge it." Standing in the middle of this creek is that female Bigfoot looking right at us. And we didn't see her that day, but she presented herself, and she was looking right at us. And I'm thinking, I said, "I told you." She's got a perfectly symmetrical set of breasts and all black. Her face is a little distorted because from the point of where my wife was taking a photograph, there's overhanging vines. So she was, there was some artifacting across her face from vines and branches in the foreground of the scenario. You could clearly see her hands across in front of her. They're kind of relaxed, in front of her. She's got her legs apart, standing in the creek, symmetrical shoulders, perfect breasts, and her ears. You could see her ears, and you could see, her head, which looks a little narrow because of this artifacting. And she's looking right at us. I said, "I told you there was a female Bigfoot out here." And she goes, "Well, I'm a believer now because I photographed." And I'm going to send you that photograph a little later, and you can judge for yourself. And a lot of people have seen it. And I'm shocked that people, of course, these are people that don't entertain stuff like this anyway. Oh, that's a rotted tree, or, lightning strike, and that's the stump. I'm like, you know what? Whatever. You can think whatever you want, man. I really don't care. There's so long story longer. I didn't notice it initially. I kept studying the photograph. I saw her, and I knew she was there anyway. So it just confirmed it for me, what I already knew. But across the creek at around 2:00, across the creek, up on the bank, is a massive, massive brown male. Well, he's kind of like brown black, more black than brown, but he's got his back to us, and his left arm is hanging down, and you can see his butt and his legs and his back, and his right arm is either propped up against the tree with his forearm, or it's got its arm around the tree. But the tree is only about 10 inches in diameter. And this thing it's got like a 3/4 profile of its face, which is lighter than the hair on it. And it's looking kind of, not looking at us, but it's kind of looking just kind of away from us to the left a bit. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this thing is massive. It dwarfs the female. And I figure, and I didn't even think about it because all I used to think about was this young female out there, just her personality seemed to be very sweet. Now I see that she has a companion. I don't know what this companion is to her, whether it's a mate or a parental unit or a friend or whatever. But you could tell clearly that this big male is watching out for her. Gonna let her do what she wants to do, but keep her safe. You know what I mean?
So almost like I immediately just pictured like his Harley was parked over on the, like that's his old lady out there, and he's got like yeah, she gets a little wild, but I'm watching. Watching.
I think how old. Well, she was clearly, obviously, she had grown because she had big full breasts, but yeah, I don't know what this other Bigfoot is to her. Clearly a protector of some sort. This thing was massive. It was giant. It was probably 9 foot tall. It was big, big, big. And while her shape was different. Her shape was a little different. She didn't have that massive broadness. She was thick, but not like this big male. So I'm guessing male. I couldn't see the front. But you couldn't see the front of the being. But
well, that experience right there, like the stuff that you were like feeling, and that to me directly ties into your spiritual side, like that feeling, like maybe because I do think that these creatures are just as much spiritual as they are flesh and blood. I mean, I really do. The more I hear and stuff, and the more stories, and it's almost like it was tapped into your spiritual side, and like knew you were open-minded.
I got chills all through my body. I think you're absolutely correct. It recognized that I'm open to these things, and itself to me. But yeah, and the other one too, even the one that stomped into camp, may have had some sort of perception about that. We might have been on the same frequency. That's maybe why I'm the only one heard it screaming at the top of its lungs. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's really something. And you get these people that subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot is interdimensional or something. Personally, I don't subscribe to that theory. I don't discount it, but I don't subscribe to that theory. To me, they're terrestrial. They're people. Not apes. There might be some ape lineage of some sort because
isn't there ape in all of us anyway?
Yes, there is. And, there is. So, and if you look at modern Europeans, they got up to 4% Neanderthal in them to this day, and that was proven by Sykes. He did a whole his book, The Seven Daughters of Eve. He was trying to trace the 7 root races all the way back to the beginning. And he discovered that, there's across the board in Europe, especially around England and that area, that the people there have a 4% Neanderthal in them. So that there was at least some interbreeding, maybe between modern humans and these beings, or either by consent or abduction. Or maybe some other means, maybe some genetic.
I mean, heck, don't they say that what percentage of Europeans are somehow descended of Attila the Hun?
Oh, too. That was proven.
Yeah.
I mean, not Attila, but yeah. I mean, I can see
or
that.
Genghis Khan.
Yeah, Genghis Khan. National Geographics went up on the eastern seaboard somewhere where there was a Mongolian community. And they had heard, like you and I have heard, that you could walk into any place and ask a Mongolian, "Are you related to Genghis Khan?" And so yeah. So National Geographics went up there, and at random they walked into some bar, picked some dude out of the crowd, did his DNA, and traced it back to Genghis Khan. He goes, "I told you." So.
So yeah. So if that, I mean, that just goes to show you what one male species could do.
Well,
of anything to populate.
Oh yeah, man! You're talking about making sure your line continues. I guess that's a form of immortality. But you know, when you talk about the Bigfoot people, that's what they are. And who knows? Maybe there is subspecies. There might very well be. I mean, you got these, allegedly you got these more aggressive, thinner, scragglier things down south. Maybe with three toes or something, like the Falk monster. Um, it could very well be subspecies, but who can say? When you talk about, people ask you, well, what do you think Bigfoot is? Well, I think they're the first people. And then when you get into the subject of human beings, sapien sapien, dude, I don't want to step on any toes, and this is well before Ancient Aliens came out. I've been a prolific reader my entire life, so I thirsted for these kinds of things. So I've sought these books out. I have books from the 1800s, on treatises on reincarnation and the human being and other beings from other worlds. Believe it or not, that were written in the 1800s. So I absorbed all this information. I read Robinson's Nag Hammadi Library some 20 some odd years ago, I guess. The Nag Hammadi Library were a series of parchments found in the cave, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls, but decades before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And it's Gnostic text, smacks of the human race. And this is going to step on some toes, but listen, the podcast is about weird stuff. So it smacks of, and the texts, the scrolls were highly fragmented. And so the translators, in their infinite wisdom, and I am so happy they did this, where there were pieces of language missing, they left it missing. Thank you so much. It was a dot dot dot. That's how they did it. In the book. So the whole book, which is like 800 pages or something, is fragmented like that. But it tells a story of the human race being created by other beings. And this is a historical document. It's well known in the archaeological community. And that's the first time that, and it's like I said, 20, 25 years ago, something like that. I forget. And it's Robinson's Nag Hammadi Library. Now, there are other renditions today, but that's the first one I read, that smacks of us being genetically engineered by different beings. And then all of a sudden you got Ancient Aliens coming out and they say all this stuff. Suddenly it sounds very interesting. So when you're talking about Bigfoot, that's what I wanted to get back to. You have to consider the true origin of the human race. So the Bigfoot being fits in a timeline, and I'm saying certainly prior to modern humans. There was depends on who you read. Human beings were on the planet, but they were not as developed as modern man. That came about in a slightly different way. So there was a branch, but it wasn't an evolutionary branch. It was a manipulation and a crossbreeding type thing, by other beings, living beings. But that's, so I can no longer talk about Bigfoot unless I talk about the origins of humans. And people are going to accept what they will. They're going to grow up and learn things a certain way, and they're not going to deviate from what they have learned. But if you want to get to the truth of things, you must search yourself. You know what I mean? You must. You cannot just accept what you've been taught. You must search into everything that if you want the answer. You got to go within, you got to go without. You know what I mean? So Bigfoot, in my opinion, are people. They preceded sapiens sapiens. So, I think that they were here long before us. If you go back to, I'll give you an example. If you want to read a scholarly piece of work, Stephanie Dalley is a highly respected linguist of ancient Sumer, um, and she deciphered the tablets that were found in Ur, which is now modern day Iraq, um, in the 20s, and wrote a book about their creation story. She writes it as myth, and she's well respected scholar, and writes it in a scholarly manner. But I'm telling you something. She writes the story of the creation in the Enuma Elish, and the history of Gilgamesh, the story of Gilgamesh, about giant, hairy men. One of them in particular was brought to King Gilgamesh, who himself was a giant. And I don't think he was, wholly human, because modern day people, they'll take a story and they'll compact it into like an inch square, when really millennia and millennia and millennia have gone by to get the story. You know what I mean? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? But these beings were known of as far back as tens of thousands of years BC in Sumer, and was written about in their texts, translated by modern day scholars who writes it as myth. Enkidu was the giant hairy man who was brought to Gilgamesh. Depends on who you read, to test the strength of the king. The king was bored. He was a giant, was not wholly human anyway. Um, and so this man creature, stood up to him, and they became fast friends. Who knows what language they spoke? English didn't come around. Modern English didn't come around really till the 1500s. I mean, you had some inklings of it in the 11s, but it really didn't come around. So English is a Johnny come lately language. I have a problem with that. Anyway, Gilgamesh and Enkidu become fast friends. They go all over the place exploring, and they get into these, things. And eventually Enkidu is killed, this hairy man, this giant hairy man. And it's also written in the same Myths of Mesopotamia by Stephanie Dalley that one of the rulers of the neighboring regions routinely housed multitudes of these giant hairy beings in his palace. So the idea of a Bigfoot has been around many, 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 many thousands of years. There is a story, and I just corroborated this about a year and a half ago with a Latter-day Saint person, somebody who's a member of the Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
There's a story, and I read this story years ago about a member of the congregation or something was riding his horse down a dirt road. And this is here in North America. And he happened upon a giant hairy man who, by description from the person on the horse, was taller than the dude sitting on his horse.
Oh, jeez.
I know. Now that's pretty damn tall.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the story goes, and I guess this hairy being spoke English, which is weird. But it told the man that it was Cain himself, and he was doomed to walk the earth for an eternity. So that's a story I read. So I know somebody who's a Latter-day Saint, and I asked them about this story, and they didn't know, but they said they would check for me. A couple of days later, she calls me back and she goes, "Man, you're absolutely right. That is written in our history. That is a true story." And I said, "There you go." So that's a Bigfoot, or a Bigfoot type of a being or something. The idea, though, that they speak English kind of rubs me the wrong way.
And that was supposed to be Cain?
That's what
Cain
the
and
story
Abel?
is. I did, yeah, Cain and Abel. I did not write the story, I just read it somewhere, and because I'm always reading all that weird stuff. But it was certainly corroborated by a Latter-day Saint that actually took place. I mean, as an eyewitness from this member of the congregation of the Latter-day Saints back in the 1800s or so. So, yeah, weird. They've been here. They're real. If you've never seen one, it's okay to discount the idea that they exist until the day you do see one and you realize they do exist.
Until the day that one's running its finger across your back in your
Hey, oh my gosh,
hammock.
listen, dude. That is incredible. And I always I always said my running joke was if I ever had an encounter, face-to-face encounter with a Bigfoot, I'd walk up and give it a Snickers. Dude, that is no way. There's, that is
Well,
not.
I wanted to ask you, like, why didn't you whip your cell phone out and take a video? Because
I
that's the
didn't have
first thing
my
is,
mom.
I
I had,
know, but that's the first thing is, I think I hear these encounters and I talk to people. Now, you're telling the story with a sense of exuberance and excitement
yeah,
because
I can't
you
tell it
you
any other way.
yeah, you like now story might have been different 5 minutes after it happened. Okay. But now you've had time to reflect on it. You are a very learned person. You have a perspective that's much different than quite a lot of other people, I believe. And you understand what happened and how lucky you were and how really exciting it is in your quest for the truth.
Oh yeah,
And I can sense all that as you're telling the story. Like you're just like, wow, this is like looking back at it, it's so amazing. And it's kind of like living, like if you and your buddies, you know, fell in the river and, went through the rapids for a mile and get
uh huh.
out and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, we did it. And you're high-fiving each other and you're like, you know, 10 minutes earlier, you're about ready to die. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
right.
You have this sense of like, wow, okay, what did I just do? It was great. And I mean, I could sense that you uh, telling that. I mean, and I almost wouldn't expect it any other way after hearing your background and the way you were brought up and the stuff that you understand, not just think, but the stuff that you understand as real, as
Oh yeah.
what is it's all about. So I totally am like I'm just flabbergasted because not many people have encounters like that, especially with other people that can cooperate them. And you can tell your brother-in-law that there's nothing more frustrating uh, than uh, than somebody that won't that won't come out and tell the
You know,
story.
he's
It
he's a
doesn't make any sense,
he. I don't get it. I honestly don't. He's kind of a zenned out dude. I mean, he's really well balanced and even keeled. But how could you not? How could you not just come out of the box screaming like you won't believe what happened? You know what I mean? How could you not? I don't
Mhm.
get it. That's like these guys that I hear on these other podcasts. Yeah, well, it stepped out in front of me, and said how do you do or what, and it is just like nonchalant. And I'm like, how can you even?
Well,
I don't.
I think that's just everybody's coping mechanism and how they
Maybe.
were and how they put things in perspective for
Yeah.
sure.
You, you,
Like I said, you have a very unique perspective that 99% of the population does not have and couldn't probably hope to have because of the way of the things you saw and experienced as a kid,
oh yeah.
for sure. But that's what makes it great.
Hey,
So,
we had I had a ghost in my house named George, and I named him George because I saw him in an out of body experience one night, and his wife called he and his wife were together, and she called him George, and he was a prankster in the house, and he loved the women, and he loved touching the women. You know what I'm saying? He, and, he was a prank. He was very harmless, but he did like to have his fun. And one of the things he did to me regularly, and I'm a book freak. I love books. I have a big library, and my wife's looking at me and says, "You better shut this down." Anyway, so this George used to blow the books off my shelf every single day, just like he stuck his arm out and just knocked them all off. And I'm like, dude, and this is how I approached him. George, I'm gonna whip your ass if you don't stop knocking my books off the shelf. And then we get playful, and he'd like walk up behind you and whisper in your ear, Dennis. And I'm like, man, you better stop that shit. So I corroborated the idea of him being George when I was redoing a mantle in the house, and I pulled the mantle off the wall, and it was an old photograph of a dude in bib overalls, which is what this guy appeared to me as. And on the back of it, it said George. So this was after the fact that I had this vision about this George, and he, like I said, man, he used to love to touch the women. And he would. My cousin spent the night with me one time. I'll never forget it. And he got up to go to the John, and I saw him walking backwards back into the room, and I said, "What's up, dude?" And he goes, "The rocking chair's rocking by itself." I said, "That's just George. Don't worry about it." So this is by this time.
It's easy for you to say.
Yeah, I mean, it is easy for me to say. That's people that don't experience it, it's not so easy. But yeah, by this time, I'm kind of like immune to it. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dennis. This has been a fabulous experience. Just listening to your experiences, listening to and that little history lesson there at the end was fantastic. I think that's one of those things where I'm going to get emails and people are going to be like, I had to write down so many names, so many book titles, so much stuff I got to check out. And I love that because I like people, like you said, like go and learn some stuff and broaden your knowledge base so you can, kind of figure out what's really going on for yourself.
No doubt. I mean, it's a big, big world out there, and there's so much we don't know. And literally, I know nothing in the whole scheme of things. If you ever want to talk about the whole OBE stuff, man, that's whatever. But
well, I think, and we'll just put a teaser out there. I think for our Patreon members, I think we'll get back together and you and I will do an episode about the outer body experiences, because I think that's I can't even imagine what you're going to teach me about that. So just don't be creeping around here out of body. And then, that's all I ask. Just don't come do that.
Right on.
So. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for hanging out, and just I hope everybody digs this conversation as much as I did, because this was really cool.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for inviting me on your show. It was a privilege and a lot of fun to boot. So yeah, we'll get back together sometime and talk about more stuff.
And I think the Howler's in trouble. I think he's in deep trouble. He's going to have to figure some stuff out.
I'm surprised. Being an officer, I'm surprised that he's never come. Well, you know what? Maybe he's one of those guys that just ain't saying it.
I don't know. Maybe I'll have to put some more pressure on him.
All right.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.